Good evening from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Tonight we're covering the move of the sixth segment for SpaceX's Starship and Super Heavy launch site here at the Kennedy Space Center. I'm Stephen Clark from Spaceflight Now, and I'll be providing some updates and commentary throughout this evening as we watch this 5-story tall segment or module for the Starship launch pad gantry tower move into position at Launch Complex 39A. Right now you're seeing that gantry on the right side of this frame in motion on its self-propelled modular transporter on the way to pad 39A. In the background you can see parts of the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. That's the Tourist Visitor Center where the Space Shuttle Atlantis, as you can see on the left-hand side of your view here, is on display. Space Shuttle Atlantis is in that building labeled Atlantis at the Visitor Complex with a full-scale mock-up of a Space Shuttle external tank there with the red light on top. You can see some other launch vehicles at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex as well in the background. A Titan rocket, a Delta II rocket on display in the distance there. And in the foreground, you can see this tower segment for the next generation Super Heavy booster and Starship on the way to pad 39A this evening to continue the construction of that launch site for SpaceX. This entire journey is about 7 miles or 11 kilometers from the departure point at SpaceX's Roberts Road facility at the Kennedy Space Center. That's where this tower segment was fabricated and constructed over the past few weeks to months. And with a lot of that prefabrication work now complete, the tower segment is on the way to pad 39A to be stacked on top of the 5 segments already in place at the launch complex here at Kennedy Space Center. We'll get much better views of this tower segment as it gets closer to our camera position here at the Kennedy Space Center press site. We'll see it pass directly in front of the vehicle assembly building on the way eastbound toward pad 39A. Weather conditions this evening are favorable. There's a waxing moon overhead, a gibbous moon, and clear skies. So weather conditions are favorable for the transfer of this large structure tonight. Right now the tower segment is heading north on a road that leads out of the Roberts Road facility. That Roberts Road facility is also where SpaceX refurbishes its Falcon 9 boosters and payload fairings. And behind that Hangar X area where the Falcon 9 refurbishment happens, SpaceX is building these tower segments and other hardware such as the chopsticks arms and other equipment for the Starship launch site before they're actually taken out to pad 39A and put into place at the launch site itself. This is the 6th of 9 tower segments that'll be moving out to pad 39A. The first 5 already are stacked vertically at the launch site, which sits about 1,000 feet or roughly 300 meters east of the existing Falcon 9 launch mount at pad 39A. So it's within the perimeter of that historic launch site, but a separate pad under construction for the Starship and Super Heavy, separate from the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy launch site at the pad. A good view now of this tower segment and a gap in the trees as it heads northbound. It'll be taking a right turn onto Shorts Road in a short period of time, and then we'll head east on Shorts Road, and then I'll take a left turn to head north on Kennedy Parkway up toward the vehicle assembly building, which is right next to our location. If you've watched our coverage before of these tower segments, it takes a couple of hours for these tower segments to be actually to complete the journey from Roberts Road out to Pad 39A. The first tower segment rolled out on June the 15th, and here it is August the 8th with segment number 6 on the move. 3 more to go after tonight to complete that full structure, which will eventually stand more than 450 feet tall. It'll be the second tallest structure at the Kennedy Space Center or the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station area, second only to the Vehicle Assembly Building that NASA uses to stack the Space Launch System moon rocket, as well as it was used to stack the Saturn V rocket back in the Apollo program, and as well as the Space Shuttle. If you're seeing some flashes in the distance, that's a thunderstorm well to the southwest of the Kennedy Space Center over the Florida Peninsula. Not a threat for this evening's operation. We're going to lose the visual of the Starship tower segment momentarily as it passes behind this building from our vantage point. There's another lightning strike off in the distance. That's well inland, well southwest of the Kennedy Space Center, so it's not a threat. That thunderstorm is at least 30 miles away from our location. So you can see that tower segment is now behind this office building at the Kennedy Space Center. We expect it to re-emerge in a short period of time. It'll make a right turn onto Shorts Road and head east on Shorts Road, and it should reappear in this area in a few minutes' time. In the meantime, here's a view of the Vehicle Assembly Building. We're going to see this Starship tower segment move on the road between our camera site and the VAB. Once it nears our position, that's probably likely 20 to 30 minutes away based on the rate of speed of previous rollouts. A beautiful sunset, as you can see here at the spaceport in Central Florida. If you enjoy our coverage, we invite you to join our YouTube channel, and you can gain access to exclusive video and also support our coverage. And those contributions through joining our YouTube channel or through the Super Chat function here on YouTube go toward helping us continue our coverage and expand our offerings for the ever-increasing pace of launch operations here at KSC and at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We're also covering, of course, the wider space industry across the United States and around the world. We also ask that you please like our stream. That helps us gain more reach for our coverage. Again, you're looking live right now at the Vehicle Assembly Building here at the Kennedy Space Center, just across the road from our location. We expect to see the Starship tower segment move along this roadway between us and the VAB on the way to Pad 39A. Right now, that tower segment is behind a building. That's why we're not showing it to you live, but we expect it to reemerge on the horizon in the distance, and when it does, we'll bring that view to you live. We're continuing to look at a live view of NASA's Vehicle Assembly Building here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Inside that building is NASA's Space Launch System moon rocket inside High Bay 3, which is on the rightmost corner of the VAB and from this angle. That launch vehicle stands 322 feet or 98 meters tall and is awaiting rollout to Pad 39B here at Kennedy no earlier than August the 18th, 10 days from today, to prepare for the launch of the long-awaited, long-delayed Artemis 1 test flight around the moon with the Orion spacecraft. This is an unpiloted test flight for the Artemis moon program that'll pave the way for future missions to the moon with astronauts. This will be the most powerful rocket to have ever launched from the Kennedy Space Center in terms of liftoff thrust. At 8.8 million pounds of thrust, it will exceed the thrust level of the Space Shuttle and the Saturn V moon rocket. So this is a large vehicle scheduled for launch no earlier than August the 29th on the Artemis 1 mission. We'll be covering that, of course, on our YouTube channel and on spaceflightnow.com. Extensive coverage planned for that mission as that launch date approaches, now 3 weeks away on August the 29th. Tonight we're covering the rollout of the next section of SpaceX's Starship and Super Heavy launch pad tower. This is for SpaceX's own Super Heavy lift rocket that will actually be somewhat larger than the Space Launch System and reusable. The launch pad is under construction here at Kennedy. This will be the second orbital launch site for the Super Heavy and Starship vehicle, following the now complete launch pad at Boca Chica Beach in South Texas at SpaceX's Starbase facility. Testing of the Super Heavy and Starship flight articles, potential flight articles at least, is now underway at Starbase in South Texas. We expect test operations and flight operations for the Super Heavy and Starship here at the Kennedy Space Center not to begin until at least next year at the rate of construction right now here at KSC. There's no firm timetable yet from SpaceX on when that might happen, when we might see a Starship launch from here in Florida. But right now that's not expected to be until at least no earlier than next year. We're now seeing the Starship tower segment once again on the move. It's reemerged from behind that building just less than a minute ago and is now heading east on Schwartz Road. You can see the segment is now closer to our position now as it heads east. It'll be taking a left turn to head north after a few more minutes. You can see that Space Shuttle Atlantis exhibit at the KSC Visitor Complex in the distance now as the Starship Tower segment is heading east. This tower segment is now approaching the turn where it'll make a left-hand turn to head north on the Kennedy Parkway toward our location next to the vehicle assembly building. Some of the buildings you can see in the background now with those red lights are at the Blue Origin Orbital Launch Complex factory area. That's where the Blue Origin New Glenn rocket will be built and tested. Just outside the gates of the Kennedy Space Center. This tower segment stands about 5 stories tall. You can see it, the upper part of the tower section sticking above the tree line in the distance here. It's now at that intersection of Schwartz Road and Kennedy Parkway, just south, a couple of miles south of the vehicle assembly building, which is where we're located roughly just across the street from the VAB. You can see here this self-propelled transporter is kind of doing a pirouette maneuver to turn north and head northbound toward the vehicle assembly building. You can see that turn appears to be complete, and the section of the Starship tower is heading north on its self-propelled transporter. This Starship tower segment is well lit as its convoy is heading left to right or south to north in this field of view. It's accompanied by Kennedy Space Center and SpaceX security, as well as the operations team in charge of the safekeeping and the rollout operation itself. Good view here of it peeking out behind the tree line. At this point, the rollout is about a couple miles done, about 5 miles or so remaining on the journey to Pad 39A. Again, this is the 6th of 9 individual sections of the Starship launch pad tower. Segment number 1 was the first to go out to Pad 39A. That occurred on June the 15th. A week later, section number 2 made the trip out to Pad 39A. Again, this is the 6th segment of the Starship launch pad tower, moving out to Pad 39A tonight for stacking to continue the construction of the orbital launch site here at KSC in Florida. The first 3 sections rolled out to Pad 39A and were stacked in June. 2 more sections were added in July last month, and this is the first segment to make its move out to Pad 39A in the month of August. There is a large crane out at Pad 39A awaiting the arrival of this tower segment to raise it on top of the 5 segments already in position. We do expect that crane to have to be reconfigured at some point during this stacking operation to gain some height for the installation of the final tower segments. We're seeing this segment, this module for the Starship launch tower passing behind another building now here at the Kennedy Space Center. We can see the top section, the top portion of this section just peeking above this structure. We'll continue tracking it. It'll reemerge momentarily. Then there's another building it will go behind that will fully obscure this tower segment for a couple of minutes. And then it'll reemerge, and we'll have a really spectacular, great view of the tower section as it passes by the vehicle assembly building. You can see this tower section now re-emerging from behind the building. Good view here of most of that structure. Continuing to head north on the 96-wheel transporter here at the Kennedy Space Center. This tower section is now approaching the vehicle assembly building. It'll be here in just a few minutes. You can see this transporter is moving at a good rate of speed northbound. When it reaches our location next to us at the press site between us and the vehicle assembly building, this journey, this rollout to pad 39A will be halfway complete. It's about a 7-mile trip from the Roberts Road area where this segment was fabricated and built up over the last couple of weeks to months. And once it reaches our location here, it'll be 3.5 miles down, 3.5 miles to go. We're going to see this tower segment move behind one more building. So we're going to lose our camera view of the tower segment for a couple of minutes, and we'll realign to show you the tower segment as it reemerges from behind the building and then gets closer to the VAB and moves right by our position here at KSC. Again, this is segment number 6 of 9 for the Starship launch pad tower. Continuing the build out of this new orbital launch site on the Space Coast of Florida. It's going to pass behind this building in just a couple of moments here, and then we'll switch views and reconfigure to show you as it approaches. It makes a right turn and approaches our position. We're looking now at the vehicle assembly building. You'll see this tower segment roll by here in a couple of moments. It'll pass between our camera site and the VAB. You can see that security escort from NASA's security team here at KSC, as well as SpaceX security accompanying the tower segment on the way out to pad 39A. We expect to see that tower emerge from behind the building in just a couple of moments. And here is the section number 6 of the Starship orbital launch site tower. Now emerging from behind the OSB-2 office building at the Kennedy Space Center, going to be making a right-hand turn onto Saturn Causeway off of Kennedy Parkway. This section stands 5 stories tall, riding this 96-wheel transporter. You can see now this transporter making the right-hand turn onto Saturn Causeway to head east out toward the Seaside Launch Complex 39A area. In this view, you can see some of the details of this structure. You can see some of the stairwells already placed inside and onto this tower section before it's even stacked on the orbital launch site. So some of the support equipment already in place, already installed on this tower section out at the Roberts Road staging and fabrication area. That reduces some of the welding and work that has to be done out at the pad itself once the segment is stacked. You can see those 96 wheels in motion on the pavement heading east on Saturn Causeway. There's a good view of those 96 wheels on this self-propelled transporter moving east on Saturn Causeway with this 5-story tall section. The next segment for SpaceX's Starship and Super Heavy launch pad in Florida is moving out to the Launch Complex 39A area tonight for stacking on top of the 5 segments already in place. This is number 6 of 9 segments for the Starship Tower. The self-propelled transporter has come to a temporary halt. This sometimes happens, particularly in this area along the 2-lane road heading east. This is a rather narrow area of roadway heading out toward Pad 39A. We've seen them make stops like this before that typically only take a few minutes before the move resumes. Right now you're looking at the top of this tower segment where section number 7 in the future will be stacked on top of section number 6. You can see some of the detail here in the structure. These segments each stand about 5 stories tall. The entire tower, when complete, will be more than 450 feet tall, comparable but not identical to the launch pad tower that SpaceX has built for the Starship and Super Heavy at Boca Chica in South Texas. You can see this motion has resumed now. The self-propelled modular transporter in motion heading east on Saturn Causeway after this stop that just lasted a couple of minutes. And here you see the Starship Tower section approaching the vehicle assembly building. The famous rocket hangar built in the 1960s for the Apollo program for the Saturn V moon rocket, later used for the space shuttle to assemble those vehicles before each launch, and now in use for the Artemis program and the Space Launch System moon rocket, which is currently inside the building, inside High Bay 3, on the right section of the VAB from this vantage point. You can see the Starship Tower segment now moving eastbound on Saturn Causeway. In the background, some of the other buildings here at the Kennedy Space Center. One of those buildings houses the Air Force's X-37B program. And here is the vehicle assembly building with the Artemis logo visible in the background here. The Artemis 1 moon rocket for the Artemis 1 test flight inside the VAB right now, preparing for rollout to Pad 39A for its test flight later this month. Always an impressive sight to see this Starship section. Each of these go by our location here at the press site. We expect in the future SpaceX to transport various other components for the Starship launch pad out to Complex 39A along this route. And eventually we may see Starship and Super Heavy flight articles make their way to the pad on this route. SpaceX and NASA have plans to widen this road to accommodate larger elements of flight hardware, such as these large booster rockets and these large Starship vehicles on their way to Pad 39A. Another wonderful view of this impressive modular transporter, self-propelled vehicle, rather, carrying this Starship segment out to Pad 39A this evening. You can see the SpaceX logo on the rear of that vehicle, and one of the operators there perched on the aft end of that transporter watching today's operation. with the Starship Tower section number 6 now past the vehicle assembly building heading east. We can call this transport tonight more than halfway complete. About 3.5 miles down, 3.5 miles to go to get out to pad 39A. If you're just joining us, you're watching the next segment, number 6 of 9, for SpaceX's future Starship and Super Heavy launch pad on the way to pad 39A this evening here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. This segment stands about 5 stories tall. You can see its relative size compared to those pickup trucks and security vehicles accompanying it on the way to the pad tonight. Continuing the buildup of the tower, which will ultimately stand more than 450 feet in height to support future launches of SpaceX's reusable, Super Heavy, and Starship rocket vehicles. Another good view of these wheels. 96 of these wheels are ferrying this structure out to pad 39A tonight at the Kennedy Space Center. You can see one of the personnel, one of the operators working on tonight's transport has placed some aids on the side of the road, some support planks on the side of the road to help enable the transporter to traverse this section of roadway, which is rather narrow, to help ensure it doesn't venture off the pavement into the grass or the mud. See some of the motion starting to slow a little bit as it navigates this portion of roadway. While we're watching this, I'll invite you once again to become a member of our YouTube channel. If you do that, you'll be supporting our coverage and helping us continue to bring you content like we're bringing you tonight. You'll also gain access to some exclusive video features through our YouTube channel exclusively for members. We also ask that you please contribute in the Super Chat function on the right-hand side of your screen in the YouTube chat area. And we'll take those contributions as well and appreciate them and help redirect those to continuing our coverage of the space program. You now see some of these lights reflected in the waters of the turn basin just next to our location here at the press site at the Kennedy Space Center. The two-lane road that the transporter and the Starship launch pad tower segment are following parallels the crawlerway. That's the recognizable historic pathway leading from the vehicle assembly building out to the two pads at Launch Complex 39 here in Florida. And NASA's Saturn V moon rockets traversed this crawlerway, routing the crawler transporter to the pad before each of the moon missions of the Apollo program. The space shuttle also followed this pathway for its 135 missions on the way to the pad, and now it's being used for transferring the Space Launch System moon rocket to Pad 39B for the Artemis program. We don't anticipate SpaceX to actually be using the crawlerway itself. This is the dual carriageway with a median in between, grassy median in between, covered in river rock. We don't expect SpaceX to actually be using the crawlerway itself, but they will be using this road, as they are tonight, that parallels the crawlerway to transport sections of the Super Heavy and Starship launch pad, as well as flight elements for the program to Pad 39A. This roadway is also used to transfer SpaceX Falcon 9 boosters between the hangar and the launch pads here in Florida, and payloads for SpaceX and United Launch Alliance. Encapsulated payloads inside the payload fairing sometimes use this roadway to get to their launch pads for integration with their rockets as well. You can see the motion continuing eastbound, heading east toward Pad 39A for stacking on the orbital launch site tower. 5 of these sections, similar to this one, have already been stacked. This is number 6, 3 more to go after tonight to complete this structure, which will stand next to the Starship and Super Heavy while it's sitting on the pad before each launch. See that bright light in the middle of your screen here is actually a rear-facing light on one of the support vehicles driving just in front of the self-propelled transporter carrying this Starship tower section. And now you can see this tower segment in relation to Launch Complex 39A on the horizon there. That's where this tower segment is heading tonight. The structure on the far right with those two red flashing lights, that is the Starship launch pad gantry tower. 5 of the 9 sections already have been stacked. Number 6 on the way tonight will be stacked by that large yellowish crane on the right side of that Starship tower sometime in the coming days. Typically that stacking has occurred within 1 or 2 days of arriving, of each segment arriving at pad 39A. We'll see when the stacking occurs for this segment later this week, potentially. The schedule may be somewhat impacted by the scheduled launch of a Falcon 9 rocket from pad 39A tomorrow night. That launch, carrying the next batch of Starlink internet satellites, is scheduled for 6:57 p.m. Eastern Time, or 22:57 UTC tomorrow, Tuesday, from pad 39A. We expect to see the Falcon 9 rocket roll out to pad 39A sometime overnight tonight to prepare for that launch tomorrow evening. Here you can see the entire pad 39A footprint. The lighted structure on the right side of your frame to the right of the Starship tower is the Falcon 9 hangar. And that's where we expect the Falcon 9 rocket to actually emerge on its transporter erector strongback support structure sometime tonight and head up the ramp to the Falcon 9 launch mount at the top of pad 39A, where it will be raised vertical in preparation for tomorrow evening's launch. There are 52 Starlink satellites on this mission launching tomorrow evening, ready to join SpaceX's global broadband network, consumer-grade broadband signals that are being broadcast by these Starlink satellites. SpaceX now has more than 2,000 active operational Starlink satellites in its fleet, and 52 more heading to space tomorrow evening on the Falcon 9 rocket from this very launch pad, pad 39A you're watching now. SpaceX is continuing the operations of the Falcon 9 rocket at pad 39A while they're building this Starship launch pad tower just off to the east of the Falcon 9 launch area itself. About 1,000 feet or 300 meters separate the launch pad for the Falcon 9, which you see in the center left of your screen here, and the Starship launch tower, which you see on the center right section of your screen. While SpaceX has been busy stacking these individual sections of the Starship tower, we also saw SpaceX recently begin building the water tower that'll be used to support Starship launches. That's the short, squat cylindrical structure you see just to the left of the Starship orbital launch site tower. So other activities for the Starship launch pad have been continuing at Pad 39A. It's not just the launch pad tower itself. There's also the water tower, the fuel farm, oxidizer farm, as well as the launch mount itself, which is located just to the right, the bottom of the launch tower that you can see here. Here's a nice view of that section number 6 of the Starship launch pad tower, silhouetted against Pad 39A as it continues to head east toward its destination tonight. Continuing to watch the Starship Tower segment number 6 making its way to pad 39A this evening here in Florida at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. This operation continues the construction of SpaceX's second Starship orbital launch site following the build out of the orbital launch site in South Texas at Boca Chica, or Starbase. Orbital launch site number 2 for Starship and Super Heavy now in work at KSC in Florida. You're looking live out toward Launch Complex 39A. The Starship Tower segment is just moving to the right side of the frame, making a little bit of a turn as it follows the two-lane pathway, two-lane road heading out toward pad 39A, riding a self-propelled modular transporter, or SPMT. This is a 96-wheel transporter to carry this 5-story tall tower section or module toward pad 39A. The journey began just after sunset from SpaceX's Roberts Road staging area on the southwestern part of the Kennedy Space Center property here in Florida. And the entire journey from Roberts Road, that staging area where this segment, along with the other segments for the Starship Tower, were fabricated and built up, out to pad 39A runs about 7 miles or 11 kilometers, so a 7-mile trip from Roberts Road to pad 39A. And at this point, roughly 1.5 miles remains on the journey to pad 39A this evening. You see some of the flashing lights reflecting off of one of the gantry structures out near pad 39A. This flashing light likely from one of the security vehicles accompanying this transport operation. That structure that you see the lights flashing off of is the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex gantry. It's a viewing gantry for launches and observation for tourists and visitors to the Space Coast. Observation of the various launch pads at KSC and at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. At this time, the Starship launch pad tower segment number 6 is approaching the area where the crawlerway that I mentioned earlier splits into 2 routes. One goes out toward pad 39A, one route goes north toward pad 39B from this junction. And from here, there's about 1 mile remaining to Pad 39A, or about 1.5 kilometers. The building you're seeing here is SpaceX's Falcon 9 hangar on the southern perimeter of Pad 39A, just outside the gate to the pad. This is where the Falcon 9 rocket that's set for launch tomorrow evening from Pad 39A is currently located. It'll be rolling out of this hangar sometime tonight, at least it's scheduled to, and it'll ride the transporter erector up the ramp to Pad 39A. That transfer will take about an hour or two to complete if everything goes according to plan. And once the rocket is in position at the top of the ramp over the flame trench, the strongback or transporter erector arm will be lifted vertical hydraulically into position to point the Falcon 9 skyward for its liftoff tomorrow evening at 6:57 p.m. Eastern Time, or 22:57 UTC, with the next batch of 52 Starlink Internet satellites. We'll, of course, have live coverage of that Falcon 9 launch, now less than 21 hours away from here at KSC. you can see, the Starship tower segment has just passed behind one of the structures out toward Pad 39A, the visitor complex viewing gantry. We expect that to reemerge shortly from behind that gantry. The rollout tonight is now in the final stretch, about a half mile or so remaining for this journey this evening. And here's a wider view of the launch pad 39A area, showing the various parts of the Launch Complex 39A footprint. On the left-hand side is the Falcon 9 launch mount, the fixed service structure, where the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets launch from, including crew missions to the International Space Station. Just to the left of center, to the right of that Falcon 9 launch area, is the Starship orbital launch site under construction. That's where this tower segment is heading tonight, to be raised on top of those 5 segments already in place with those red blinking lights on top. This section 6 will go on top of those. It'll be raised on top by that yellowish crane that you see there, just to the right of that orbital launch site tower. At some point, we expect that crane to be raised to get an extension to be able to reach to the top of the Starship tower for the stacking of the final segments. We're not sure exactly when the crane will be raised, but we do expect that to happen at some point before stacking the final segments. This is segment 6 of 9 going to pad 39A tonight. We'll zoom back in now on the tower segment as it is now more visible. It's heading along the curve in the road that curves from east to north. As it approaches pad 39A, it's approaching the Falcon 9 hangar that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. That's the south door of the hangar. That's the door that payloads and booster elements enter for integration before they roll out of the north door on the way to the launch pad just before launch. This tower segment will pass behind the hangar. We'll lose our view of it for a few minutes while it passes behind the hangar until it reemerges for the final leg of the journey to the Starship launch site area. And now you can see that tower segment passing on the other side, the far side of the Falcon 9 hangar. We expect it to disappear from view shortly, but we'll pick it up again when it reemerges in a few minutes' time on the left or north side of the hangar for that final leg of its journey, its rollout to the Starship orbital launch site construction area, where it will be picked up with a crane sometime in the coming days for raising or lifting on top of the 5 segments already in place as the construction of the Starship launch site here in Florida continues. We're now looking live out toward Launch Complex 39A here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We're waiting for the Starship Tower segment to reemerge from behind the Falcon 9 hangar out at Pad 39A. We see that light beginning to build on the north end of the hangar, so we should see it emerging momentarily. This Starship Tower segment is in the home stretch of its rollout from SpaceX's Roberts Road fabrication or construction site, where teams have been integrating each of these individual segments, 9 in total, along with umbilical arms and other hardware for the Starship pad, before transporting each of these elements individually to Pad 39A for stacking. And there is that Starship Tower segment number 6 reemerged from behind the hangar for the final few hundred meters of its journey to Pad 39A and the Starship orbital launch site tonight. This segment is riding a self-propelled modular transporter. This entire journey tonight has lasted now nearly 3 hours from the time it left the Roberts Road area, covering 7 miles or about 11 kilometers. You're continuing to look at a live shot of Launch Complex 39A here in Florida at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. We're watching Starship Tower segment number 6, the 6th of 9 sections for this launch pad gantry structure for the Super Heavy and Starship, SpaceX's next generation rocket program. This construction of the Starship launch site is continuing in Florida. And tonight's move of section number 6 of 9 continues that assembly of that tower. The tower that you're seeing with the flashing red lights is the gantry support structure, umbilical tower, that will be standing next to the Super Heavy and Starship vehicles while they're on the launch pad before each mission. When complete, the structure will stand about 450, a little more than 450 feet tall. And that is now standing more than half of that height, with 5 of 9 segments in place. Number 6 on the way tonight. Once this rollout is complete, we expect the Starship gantry segment to roll into position next to the crane, and it'll stop there overnight. And then when the crane is ready to pick it up and raise it on top of the other 5 segments, that transporter that the segment is riding on will actually be moved underneath the crane, within reach of that crane, to allow it to hoist the section on top of the 5 segments already in place at the launch site. Good evening again from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. You're looking live at Launch Complex 39A, where SpaceX is continuing to build the Starship launch pad, Starship Orbital Launch Site number 2, for the company's next generation Super Heavy booster and Starship rocket program. Tonight we saw segment number 6 of 9 move out to pad 39A for stacking on top of the tower you see there with the flashing red lights. That crane in the middle of your screen in the coming days is expected to lift the tower segment on top of the 5 sections already stacked. And with that, the tower will be roughly 2/3 complete. 6 of 9 sections will be stacked at that point. The first segment rolled out to the pad back on June the 15th. And with tonight's move, segment number 6 is now at pad 39A. 3 more sections are in various stages of construction and fabrication at an off-site construction area, also on KSC property to the southwest of the Vehicle Assembly Building in the southwestern part of the Space Center. And one by one, SpaceX has been moving these segments out to pad 39A to build up this tower. Once the tower is complete, SpaceX will attach umbilical arms and also move out the pedestal, the circular base on which the Super Heavy booster and the Starship will sit on the pad. In the meantime, we've seen SpaceX work on the water tower, which is on the left side of your screen. The first section of that water tower was lifted into place by a crane a few days ago. So the build out of this launch site for this giant Super Heavy and Starship rocket continues here in Central Florida. Here's a bit of a wider view of Launch Complex 39A. In parallel with the construction of the Starship launch site, SpaceX has been continuing to launch Falcon 9 rockets from this pad, and another Falcon 9 is set for launch from pad 39A tomorrow evening with the next 52 Starlink Internet satellites. The Falcon 9 is scheduled for launch at 6:57 p.m. Eastern Time, or 22:57 UTC, from this launch pad. And we'll bring that to you live on our YouTube channel. You can look out for a preview and full coverage also in spaceflightnow.com on our homepage. We thank you for joining our coverage tonight. If you want to contribute to our coverage and gain access to exclusive video features, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. We invite you to do that. We also invite you to join our coverage of the Falcon 9 launch tomorrow evening, as I just mentioned. Launch coverage will begin a little more than an hour before launch time. Liftoff time, once more, is set for 6:57 p.m. Eastern Time, or 22:57 UTC. We expect to see the Falcon 9 roll out of the hangar, which is the horizontal low-lying structure to the right side of the pad in this view. In the coming hours, the Falcon 9 is expected to emerge from that hangar and roll up the ramp to pad 39A, where it'll be lifted vertical for final launch and countdown preparations tomorrow. Until then, I'm Stephen Clark reporting live from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.